Hello everyone, this is Lamid Zane of Code Logical, and in this tutorial video we're gonna have a look at dynamic segments in the URL. Okay, so what are dynamic segments in Ember.js? Basically, dynamic segments are a way of individually accessing a single record inside of a list of records. So what do I mean by that? If we have a look at the routes defined here in the router function, you will notice that there are two routes named similarly. One is people and one is person. So the people route is just pointing to the path /people, and basically that means just give me a list of people, a list of persons. And the next route has a name of person, and its corresponding part is similar to the first one, but it has an additional part of the path, which is /ID. So this is the interesting part that we want to deal with in this tutorial video, and that's the dynamic segment. And in Ember.js, dynamic segments always have to start with a colon and then the name of the dynamic part. So in this case, we can do either ID or person ID, but just for demonstration's sake, I will just put ID there. But for good conventions, usually you want to do something like person_ID. Okay. Just to show that this will work as well, I'll just leave it as ID. Okay, so let's go back to the rest of our application. I have a model defined, which is person model, since we'll be dealing with a person in this video. And then I specified that the adapter must be a fixture adapter. That is, don't go to the don't go to the server to fetch data. Instead, try to fetch it from the fixtures. And then I defined some fixtures with some names: Ryan, Tom, Yehuda, and Eric, Brian. Okay. Now what's left is to create a template for this people route here, and I went ahead and did that already. So inside of our index.html, I do have a template there with an ID of people, so that's where will correspond to this route here, people. I haven't created anything for person yet. We'll get to that shortly. Okay, so in this template here for people, I'm just looping over the data that's coming in from the model, and then just saying for each item in the model, just show the first name and the last name. Okay, but before we do that, we have to create a route for this route here, route definition. And the reason for that is because this route here, when it loads the template won't know which model it has to receive, so we have to specify that inside the route. So when we do app.person route equals to ember.route.extend, and in here we just specify a model, and as usual it has to be a function that just returns the query that we do for the list of records. So we do this.store.find, and what we want to find, the record which has the name of person. So get all the persons and then return that. So this will just go to the fixtures here and get all these. Okay, and now when we refresh, we should see a list of people being shown here, and we have an error, and basically says the value that each loops over must be an array. You pass generated people controller. Okay, that's fine, and the reason for that is this person route here is corresponding to this second route we defined, and we have to define it for people. So remember, people route is different from person route, so let's rectify that. Back in our browser, when we refresh, we should show a list of people. So just back to that one point again. The reason why that didn't work is when I comment this out, Ember generates a controller like this, app.people controller. But this people controller, Ember doesn't know what type of controller it has to be because we haven't specified the model type that's coming in from here. So Ember defaults to a generated controller, which is not of the type array. But inside of this template here, we are saying loop over an array. So we are expecting that an array controller will be generated. But since Ember doesn't know what type of model we are providing for that controller, it just defaults to some controller which is not an array controller. So that is why we have to create this route here. So Ember checks that if there is a route defined, it checks the model coming in from the route. If it's an array, it just creates an array controller in the background for you. If it is not an array, it just creates an object controller. Okay, so now that works. We have the loop of the people inside of the fixtures. Now I want to bring your attention to this ID part here. We're going to create a link to helper that links to one single person. So let's do that here. We link to the single person, and then what do we want to supply a person there? So we just said this as usual, and closing the link to helper. Okay, so this each here is looping over each person, and then we're linking to a person route, and then providing the instance of that person. So let's create actually, before we do that, I just want to show you something, one error that trips off a lot of people. Let's just copy this here. So now we have to create a template for a single person. So we have the template that lists the people. Now we have to just show a single person. That's all we need. So I'll just remove all of this, because inside a single person there's no need to link to that person again. Okay, so we have a person. Let me just refresh this. As you can see, when I hover over these people, you will see the IDs in this part of the browser here. So let's click on Tom Dale, and we should see Tom Dale's dedicated page and the URL being updated. As you can see, we have gone to people/2. So let me just recap what's happened here. So Tom Dale model has been passed to this route here, and the route extracted the ID part and just put that in the URL. Okay, so let's refresh this browser and see what happens. But before we do that, I want to make sure that we know what should be happening. Right now, this is not what the application is getting that information from. Obviously, this URL has been updated, but it's because we passed in a model from this page here. So I click on Ryan Giggs, and what happens is Ryan Giggs's model will be passed to this route here of the current page we're on, and then the ID will be extracted from the route, not the URL ID here. And that's explicitly said in the Ember.js docs. But if we happen to refresh this page, and we're currently on this page, or we send it to a friend of ours and say view this page, they will be coming in to this route, not by having a model, but through the URL. And so Ember will say, okay, I have this dynamic part here, now let me just go and fetch the model with that ID. But since we haven't created the model hook for a single person, we should get an error. So I'll refresh this, and we didn't get an error here, but as you can see, there's no person being shown here. So let's go back to the previous page, and when I click here now, we should get Yehuda on that page, or Ryan Giggs actually. See what's happening? When I refresh, nothing shows. And the reason for that is we haven't defined a specific model for a person. So we'll do that. So we'll say app.person equals to ember.route.extend. Okay, so inside this person here, we have to create a model with a function, and this is slightly different from the previous model we'll be creating, in that we'll have a parameter here called params, and inside here in this params, since we're coming in from the URL, by refreshing the page we should have access to something called the ID. So this dynamic part, if I named it something else, I should be able to do something like access the ID by using params.something else. Okay, but something else isn't very informative, so I'll take it back to ID. So we have params.id, and let's query the fixtures by saying return this.store.find. And what do I want to find? I want to find a single person. So instead of getting all the people, I'll pass a second argument, which is coming in from this URL here, and that's what I'll pass in as a second. So when you don't pass a second parameter, it just gets all the records. When you pass in a second, it gets you the record for that single ID. Okay, so let's go back in our browser. Remember last time we refreshed this and nothing happened, but when we refresh this time, if everything goes well, we should see the person's details shown here. So I refresh this page and still we have an error. Okay, and the reason for that is I forgot to put a route after here, so you have to do person route. So we'll go back to our browser and then we'll refresh. As you can see, we have Ryan Giggs. So let's go back to the previous page, click on Yehuda Katz, and still Yehuda Katz's profile is being displayed here. Nothing fancy, but we'll beef that up in a different video. Okay, when I refresh that again, we still have Yehuda Katz. Okay guys, that's it for this tutorial video. I hope dynamic segments is a bit clearer. It's something very interesting in Ember.js and I like it a lot. It's very easy to work with, but it trips you up when you're beginning to work with it. And I thank you for watching this video. If it was helpful, please do comment and subscribe to my channel, Code Logical, and I shall see you soon in another video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.